My wife took her lover to her company party, thinking I wouldn't go. She was laughing and introducing him to all her colleagues, but when she saw me walk into the ballroom, panic. When she realized who was truly by my side, her blood ran cold. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Gerald, and at 56 years old, I thought I knew everything about my wife of 32 years. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday evening in October. I was sitting in my leather recliner, reading the financial section of the newspaper, when Autumn burst through the front door with an energy I hadn't seen in years. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, and she was practically humming as she kicked off her heels. "Gerald, you'll never guess what happened at work today," she said, not waiting for me to respond. "The company is throwing this huge gala next Friday. Black tie, open bar, the works. Apparently some big clients are flying in from Chicago." I looked up from my paper, genuinely interested. "That sounds nice. Should I rent a tux?" The silence that followed felt like ice water in my veins. Autumn's face shifted, the excitement dimming as if someone had turned down a light switch. She busied herself with her purse, avoiding my eyes. "Oh, well, actually, it's more of a work thing, you know? Very professional. Lots of networking." She waved her hand dismissively. "You'd probably be bored out of your mind. All those corporate conversations about quarterly reports and marketing strategies." I folded the newspaper slowly, studying her face. In 32 years of marriage, Autumn had never once suggested I'd be bored by anything. She used to beg me to come to her work events, proud to show off her husband who owned his own accounting firm. "I see," I said quietly. "Well, if you think it's best." She smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Exactly. You understand. I'll probably just grab dinner with some colleagues afterward anyway. Might be late." That night I lay awake listening to Autumn hum softly in the bathroom as she went through her skincare routine. She hadn't hummed in our bedroom for at least 5 years. When she finally came to bed, she was wearing a nightgown I'd never seen before. Something silky and expensive looking. "Where did that come from?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "This old thing. I've had it forever," she replied, but I heard the slight tremor in her voice. Another lie. The next morning I watched from the kitchen window as Autumn practically skipped to her car. She was wearing a new dress, navy blue with a belt that accentuated her waist. When had she bought that? More importantly, when had she started caring about her appearance again? I spent that day at my office, but I couldn't concentrate on the tax returns scattered across my desk. My mind kept drifting back to Autumn's strange behavior. The excitement, the new clothes, the lies. A sick feeling was growing in the pit of my stomach. Thursday evening, I came home to find Autumn on the phone in the kitchen. She was speaking in a low, intimate voice that I recognized but hadn't heard directed at me in years. "No, Friday will be perfect," she was saying. "I can't wait for you to meet everyone. They're going to be so impressed." When she saw me, she jumped slightly and quickly wrapped up the conversation. "Listen, I have to go. See you tomorrow night. Looking forward to it." "Who was that?" I asked, setting my briefcase down. "Just Sarah from accounting. You know how she gets nervous about these big events." Autumn turned away, opening the refrigerator. I was just reassuring her. But I knew Sarah from accounting. We'd met several times over the years. That wasn't Sarah's voice I'd heard on the other end of the line. It was deeper, masculine. My hands started to shake. Friday morning arrived with an unusual flurry of activity. Autumn was up before dawn, showering, doing her hair, applying makeup with a precision I hadn't seen since our wedding day. She'd laid out an outfit on the bed that must have cost more than my monthly car payment. A black cocktail dress with matching shoes and jewelry. "You look beautiful," I said from the doorway, and I meant it. She did look beautiful, but not for me. "Thank you," she replied, but she was looking at herself in the mirror, not at me. "I really want to make a good impression tonight." "On your colleagues?" "Yes, of course, on my colleagues." But again, that hesitation, that tell I'd learned to recognize over 3 decades of marriage. I sat on the edge of our bed, watching her apply lipstick with steady hands. "Autumn, is there something you want to tell me?" She froze for just a moment, the lipstick tube halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "You seem different lately." happier, more excited about things. She laughed, but it sounded forced. Can't a woman be excited about her job? I've been working really hard on this project, and tonight is the culmination of months of effort. What project? Another pause. Just client relations stuff. Very technical. You wouldn't find it interesting. I nodded, but something inside me was breaking. My wife of 32 years was lying to me, and we both knew it. She was getting dressed up for someone else, excited about someone else, planning an evening that didn't include me. Well, have a wonderful time, I said, standing up. I'll probably just watch the game and order some Chinese food. Perfect, she said, and the relief in her voice was like a knife in my chest. Don't wait up. I'll probably be very late. As I watched her drive away that evening, humming again and checking her appearance one last time in the rearview mirror, I realized that I had become invisible in my own marriage. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being Autumn's husband and become simply part of the furniture. But as I stood there in our empty house, surrounded by 32 years of memories, I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. It was time for Autumn to discover that her boring, predictable husband wasn't quite as invisible as she thought. The number I dialed belonged to Victoria Ashford, and our first conversation 6 months ago had been purely accidental. I had been sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Patterson's office for my annual physical when a woman next to me answered her phone with a crisp, professional tone that immediately caught my attention. "Victoria Ashford speaking," she said, and I recognized the voice immediately. It was the same voice that had been mentioned in hushed, reverential tones around our dinner table for the past 2 years whenever Autumn talked about work. Victoria Ashford, the CEO of Meridian Consulting, the company where Autumn worked as a senior project coordinator. According to my wife, she was a formidable woman, brilliant but intimidating, someone who commanded respect from everyone in the building. But sitting there in Dr. Patterson's waiting room, Victoria didn't seem intimidating at all. She was perhaps 50 years old, with silver streaked brown hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing a simple but expensive-looking grey suit. What struck me most was how tired she looked, how she rubbed her temples as she spoke into the phone about quarterly projections and client deliverables. When she ended the call, she noticed me looking and offered a polite smile. "Long day," she said simply. "I can imagine," I replied. "You sound like you're dealing with a lot of responsibility." She laughed, a sound that was both warm and slightly bitter. "That's one way to put it. Sometimes I think I'm surrounded by people who want to impress me but never actually listen to what I'm saying." Something in her voice resonated with me. I know that feeling. We ended up talking for 45 minutes while we waited. Victoria was nothing like the cold, calculating executive Autumn had described. She was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth. She asked about my accounting firm, and I found myself telling her about the satisfaction of helping small business owners navigate their finances, the pride I took in building something from scratch. "You know," she said as we both finally got called for our appointments, "it's refreshing to meet someone who talks about their work with genuine passion. Most people just complain or brag." We exchanged business cards, and over the next 6 months we began meeting for coffee occasionally. Never anything improper. Always in public places, always as friends. Victoria was going through her own challenges. Her husband had passed away 3 years earlier, and she was learning to navigate both her career and her personal life alone. What surprised me was how easy it was to talk to her. We discussed books, current events, the challenges of running a business. She had a sharp wit and a genuine interest in what I had to say. With Autumn, conversations had become perfunctory exchanges about schedules and household maintenance. With Victoria, I remembered what it felt like to be intellectually engaged. More importantly, Victoria listened to me. Really listened. When I told her about a difficult client or a problem at work, she asked follow-up questions, offered insights, treated my opinions as valuable. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had done that. Over time, I learned more about Meridian Consulting and Victoria's philosophy about leadership. She believed in treating employees with respect, in recognizing their contributions, in creating an environment where people could do their best work. It made me think about how differently Autumn described her workplace experience. According to my wife, Victoria was a micromanager who played favorites, someone who was impossible to please and created a toxic work environment, but the woman I knew was thoughtful, fair, and deeply committed to her company's success. The disconnect was puzzling. It wasn't until our fourth coffee meeting that I mentioned I was married. Victoria had been telling me about her struggle to maintain work-life balance, and I found myself saying, "My wife always says that successful people sacrifice their personal relationships for their careers." "Your wife sounds wise," Victoria said, but something flickered across her face. "What does she do?" "She works in consulting, actually. Project coordination." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "At which firm?" When I told her Meridian Consulting, her expression changed completely. The warmth in her eyes cooled, replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. "What's your wife's name, Gerald?" "Autumn. Autumn Patterson." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee even though she hadn't added anything to it. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. "I see." That was all she said, but I could tell there was more. Much more. Our conversation that day was shorter than usual, and when we parted ways, Victoria seemed distracted. I spent the next week wondering if I'd said something wrong, if somehow mentioning Autumn had damaged our friendship. But Victoria called the following week, asking if I wanted to meet for lunch instead of coffee. When I arrived at the restaurant, she was already seated, looking more serious than I'd ever seen her. "Gerald," she said, after we'd ordered, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. How would you describe your marriage?" The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask?" "Just curious. You've mentioned your wife several times, but you never really talk about your relationship with her." I found myself being more honest than I'd intended. "It's, complicated. We've been married for 32 years. I love her, but lately I feel like we're living parallel lives rather than sharing one." Victoria nodded slowly. "Does she ever talk about her work? About her colleagues?" "Not really. She used to, but in recent years she's become more private about it. She says I wouldn't be interested in the details." "And how does that make you feel?" "Invisible," I said, surprised by my own honesty. Like I'm not important enough to include in her thoughts. Victoria reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "Gerald, I want you to know that you're one of the most interesting, thoughtful people I've met in years. If someone is making you feel invisible, that says nothing about your worth and everything about their priorities." It wasn't until I was driving home that I realized Victoria had never directly answered my questions about why she was asking. But her words had planted something in my mind, a seed of possibility I'd been afraid to acknowledge. I deserved to be seen. I deserved to be heard. I deserved to be valued. Now, standing in my empty house on Friday evening, knowing that Autumn was at her company party with another man, I scrolled through my phone until I found Victoria's number. My finger hovered over the call button for several seconds before I pressed it. She answered on the second ring. "Gerald, is everything all right?" "Victoria," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "I need to ask you a favor. Are you busy tonight?" Victoria's response to my call was immediate and without hesitation. "I'll pick you up in 30 minutes, she said. "We're going to that party." As I hung up the phone, my hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in years, anticipation. For the first time in decades, I was about to take control of my own narrative. I showered and put on my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to our anniversary dinner last year when Autumn had spent most of the evening on her phone. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a man who had forgotten his own worth. Tonight that was going to change. When Victoria's silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway, I felt my breath catch. She stepped out wearing an elegant black evening gown that complemented her silver hair perfectly. She looked like exactly what she was, a successful, confident woman who commanded respect wherever she went. "You look wonderful," she said as I approached, and the sincerity in her voice made something inside my chest tighten with emotion. "So do you," I replied. "Victoria, I need you to know that I would never ask you to do anything that would compromise your position at work." She smiled, but there was something almost sad in her expression. "Gerald, there are things about your wife's behavior at work that you should know. Things that go far beyond tonight." As we drove toward the Marriott downtown where the party was being Held, Victoria explained what I had been too blind to see. Autumn hadn't just been lying to me about tonight. She'd been lying to everyone. She's been telling her colleagues that you two are separated, Victoria said, her voice gentle but firm. She's been presenting herself as essentially single for the past 6 months. The man she's bringing tonight, his name is Marcus Thompson. She's been introducing him around the office as her boyfriend. The words hit me like a physical blow. Separated, boyfriend. While I'd been coming home every night to a woman who barely acknowledged my existence, she'd been creating an entirely different reality at work. There's more, Victoria continued. She's been using company resources for personal matters. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, gifts, all charged to client entertainment accounts. Marcus works for one of our competitor firms, and some of the information she's shared with him has put our client relationships at risk. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, feeling numb. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth, and because watching someone with your integrity be treated this way makes me angry. She paused. Gerald, I've been thinking about this for weeks, ever since I realized who you were married to. Autumn has been painting you as an absent, disinterested husband who doesn't support her career ambitions. But the man I know would never be those things. When we pulled up to the hotel, my heart was pounding. The valet took Victoria's car keys with the deference reserved for VIPs, and I realized that walking in with her would send a very clear message to everyone at the party. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers, round tables draped in white linens, a small orchestra playing softly in one corner. The company had clearly spared no expense. I recognized several faces from previous events I'd attended with Autumn over the years, back when I was still considered worthy of inclusion. But it was Autumn herself who took my breath away. She was standing near the bar, radiant in her black dress, laughing at something the man beside her was saying. Marcus Thompson was tall, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of easy smile that suggested he was used to charming people. His hand was resting possessively on the small of Autumn's back. What struck me most was how happy she looked. This was the woman I'd fallen in love with 32 years ago. Vibrant, engaged, full of life. The realization that she could still be that person, just not with me, felt like being stabbed with a rusty knife. There, I said quietly to Victoria. That's them. Victoria followed my gaze and her expression hardened. I see. We made our way into the crowd and I watched as heads turned to acknowledge Victoria. She commanded respect effortlessly, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride in my companion. It took exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds for Autumn to notice us. I was standing with Victoria near the cocktail station when I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. I turned to see Autumn frozen in place, her champagne glass halfway to her lips, staring at us with an expression of pure shock. For a moment our eyes met across the crowded room. I saw confusion, then dawning realization, then something that looked very much like panic. Marcus was still talking to her, but she wasn't listening anymore. Her face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Gerald? Marcus's voice carried across the noise as Autumn apparently whispered my name to him. That's your husband? I couldn't hear Autumn's response, but I saw her nod slightly, never taking her eyes off Victoria and me. Shall we go say hello? Victoria asked, her voice pleasant, but with an undertone of steel. As we approached, I watched Autumn's panic intensify. She kept glancing between Victoria and me, clearly trying to process what she was seeing. The confident, radiant woman from moments before had been replaced by someone who looked like she'd been caught stealing from the collection plate. Autumn, Victoria said when we reached them, her voice perfectly professional. I'm so glad to see you here tonight, and you must be Marcus. Marcus extended his hand with a politician's smile. Marcus Thompson from Bradley & Associates, and you are? Victoria Ashford, CEO of Meridian Consulting. The effect was immediate. Marcus's confident expression faltered as he realized he was shaking hands with his girlfriend's boss. But it was Autumn's reaction that truly caught my attention. She looked like she might faint. Victoria, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't expecting to see me here with Gerald, Victoria finished smoothly. Well, we've been spending quite a bit of time together lately, haven't we, Gerald? I found my voice, surprised by how calm I sounded. Yes, we have. Victoria's wonderful company. The silence that followed was deafening. Around us the party continued, but our little group had created a bubble of tension that seemed to suck all the air from the room. Marcus looked confused, glancing between Autumn and me. I thought you said you were separated. Autumn's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It's complicated. Is it? I asked, my voice still eerily calm. I wasn't aware we were separated, Autumn. When exactly did that happen? Her eyes darted around wildly, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Gerald, please, not here. Where then? I asked. At home, where you've been lying to me for months? Or perhaps we should discuss it at your office, where you've been telling your colleagues we're separated while I've been coming home to you every night. Marcus took a step back, clearly realizing he'd walked into something much more complicated than a simple office romance. Maybe I should give you folks some privacy. No, Victoria said firmly, her CEO voice cutting through the tension. I think everyone should stay. After all, this affects all of us. She turned to Autumn with an expression I'd never seen before, professional disappointment mixed with personal disgust. Autumn, I think it's time we had a conversation about your recent behavior and how it reflects on this company. Autumn's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing through our tense silence like a gunshot. As hotel staff rushed to clean up the mess, I saw my wife of 32 years truly panic for the first time in our marriage. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Victoria's suggestion that we have a conversation sent a visible shudder through Autumn's body. Around us the party continued, but I could sense that several colleagues were beginning to notice the tension radiating from our small group. Perhaps, Victoria said with the kind of authority that had built her career, we should move this discussion somewhere more private. She gestured toward a small conference room adjacent to the ballroom, one that the hotel typically used for business meetings. It was perfect. Private enough for honesty, but public enough that Autumn couldn't simply run away. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Look, I think maybe I should just go. This seems like a family matter. Actually, Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of finality that ended arguments before they began. You're very much a part of this discussion, Mr. Thompson. Your relationship with my employee has implications that go far beyond personal matters. As we walked toward the conference room, I watched Autumn's face cycle through emotions like a broken kaleidoscope. Panic, anger, desperation, and something that looked almost like relief. After 6 months of living a double life, the weight of maintaining her deception was finally becoming visible. The conference room was stark and professional, with a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. Victoria closed the door behind us and gestured for everyone to sit. The sound of the party was muffled now, making our small space feel isolated and charged with possibility. Gerald, Victoria began, settling into the chair at the head of the table like the CEO she was. Would you like to start, or shall I? I looked at my wife, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Even in her panic, she was beautiful. The black dress was perfect on her makeup flawless, her hair styled with obvious care. She had prepared for this evening like a bride prepares for her wedding, and none of that preparation had been for me. Autumn, I said quietly, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. She glanced frantically between Victoria and me, her hands trembling as she clutched her small purse. Gerald, please, not like this, not here. Where then? I asked. Because apparently at home isn't an option since you've been telling people we're separated. At your office isn't an option because you've been introducing Marcus as your boyfriend. So where exactly would be appropriate? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Look, Autumn told me that you two had been living separate lives for over a year. She said you barely spoke, that you were planning to file for divorce after the holidays. If that wasn't true. It wasn't, I said simply. I come home to Autumn every night. We share a bed, eat dinner together, discuss our days. Or at least I thought we did. Apparently she's been living in a completely different reality. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her expression professional but not unkind. Autumn, I've been aware of your relationship with Marcus for several weeks now. What I wasn't aware of until tonight was that you've been misrepresenting your marital status to your colleagues and using company resources to support a personal relationship. The color drained from Autumn's face. I can explain. Please do, Victoria said. Because charging personal dinners and weekend trips to client entertainment accounts while dating a competitor is grounds for immediate termination. Adding false statements about your personal life to create a narrative that benefits your deception makes it a character issue. I watched as Autumn's carefully constructed world began to crumble. This wasn't just about our marriage anymore. This was about her career, her reputation, her entire sense of identity. I never meant for it to happen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus and I met at a client meeting 6 months ago and we just connected. He was charming and interested in what I had to say, and he made me feel alive again. And instead of talking to your husband about feeling unfulfilled, Victoria continued, you decided to create an elaborate lie that painted him as an absent, unsupportive spouse. Gerald is a... Autumn started, then stopped, seeming to realize that anything she said would only make things worse. He's not a bad man, he's just predictable, safe. He comes home, reads his paper, watches his shows. We haven't had a real conversation in years. That's not true, I said, and I was surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I've tried to have conversations with you, Autumn. You're the one who started responding with one-word answers and distracting yourself with your phone. Because you only want to talk about boring things, she exploded, finally showing the emotion that had been building. Your client's tax problems, the weather, what we're having for dinner. When's the last time you asked me about my dreams, Gerald? When's the last time you seemed excited about anything? The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment I felt the familiar guilt begin to creep in. But then Victoria spoke. Autumn, she said, her voice cutting through my self-doubt. I've had extensive conversations with Gerald over the past 6 months. He's one of the most engaging, thoughtful people I've encountered in years. If he seemed boring to you, I suspect that says more about your capacity for appreciation than it does about his conversation skills. I felt something shift inside my chest. Victoria had just defended me in a way that Autumn never had, even in the early years of our marriage. Marcus, who had been silent through most of this exchange, finally spoke up. Look, I think I need to leave. This is obviously more complicated than I understood, and I don't want to cause any more problems for anyone. Actually, Victoria said, your presence here is quite helpful. It clarifies several things. She turned back to Autumn. You've put both yourself and this company in a compromising position. Marcus works for a competitor and you've shared confidential client information with him during your personal meetings. I never told him anything confidential, Autumn protested, but her voice lacked conviction. You discussed the Morrison account restructuring during your dinner at Le Bernardin 2 weeks ago, Victoria said calmly. The conversation was overheard by one of their associates, who felt obligated to report it to their supervisors. The room fell silent except for the sound of Autumn's sharp breathing. I realized I was watching the complete dismantling of the life she'd tried to build on lies and deception. Gerald, Victoria said, turning to me with an expression that was both professional and deeply personal. I owe you an apology. I've known about Autumn's situation for weeks, but I didn't know how to tell you without betraying confidences. When you called tonight, it felt like fate was giving me an opportunity to set things right. You've known? Autumn whispered, her face now completely white. How long have you known? About your relationship with Marcus, 6 weeks. About your lies regarding your marriage, 3 weeks. About your misuse of company funds, as of this afternoon when I finally had accounting run a detailed report. I watched as Autumn seemed to physically shrink in her chair. The confident, radiant woman from the ballroom was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and frightened. What happens now? Marcus asked quietly. Victoria's expression was all business now. Mr. Thompson, I'm sure you understand that your relationship with my employee has created a conflict of interest that affects both our companies. I'll be speaking with your supervisors on Monday. She turned to Autumn. As for you, we'll be meeting in my office first thing Monday morning to discuss your future with this company." Then she looked at me and her expression softened. "Gerald, I think you and I should talk privately." As we prepared to leave the conference room, Autumn grabbed my arm desperately. "Gerald, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling, start over. I made mistakes, but we can fix this." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. For 32 years I had been trying to earn the kind of attention from her that she had been freely giving to a man she'd known for 6 months. "Autumn," I said gently, "the problem isn't that we can't fix this. The problem is that I don't want to anymore." Her hand fell away from my arm like a dead weight, and I walked out of the room with Victoria, leaving behind 3 decades of a marriage that had been slowly suffocating both of us. Victoria and I didn't return to the party. Instead, we walked to the hotel bar, where the dim lighting and quiet jazz music provided a sanctuary from the emotional storm we'd just weathered. I felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out my insides with a spoon. But there was also something else. A strange sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in years. "How are you feeling?" Victoria asked as we settled into a corner booth, her voice gentle with concern. "Numb," I admitted. "Relieved, angry, sad. I think I'm feeling everything and nothing at the same time." She nodded knowingly. "When my husband died, I felt something similar. The end of something significant, even when it's the right thing, creates a kind of emotional vacuum." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, nursing our drinks and processing what had just happened. Around us, couples chatted intimately at small tables, and I wondered if any of them were as disconnected as Autumn and I had become. "Victoria," I said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "How long have you known who I was married to?" She smiled ruefully, tracing the rim of her wineglass with her finger. "I suspected after our second coffee meeting, when you mentioned your wife worked in consulting. I confirmed it after you told me her name. The timeline fit too perfectly. A woman at my company complaining about her absent husband while spending time with a man who clearly wasn't absent at all." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I hoped I was wrong," she said simply. "And because I was falling for you." The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us was quite ready to cross. I set down my whiskey and looked at this remarkable woman who had just upended my entire world. "Victoria." "I know it's complicated," she said quickly. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you need time to process what just happened. But I also know that I haven't felt this way about anyone since my husband died, and I couldn't let tonight end without you knowing that." I reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was warm and soft, and holding it felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. "The timing might be terrible," I said, "but the feeling isn't wrong." We talked until the bar closed at 2 in the morning, about our marriages, our fears, our hopes for the future. Victoria told me about the loneliness of building a successful career while watching her personal life crumble around her. I told her about the slow suffocation of trying to love someone who had stopped seeing me as worthy of effort. When she dropped me off at home, Autumn's car wasn't in the driveway. I let myself into our empty house and stood in the foyer, surrounded by 32 years of accumulated memories. Wedding photos, vacation souvenirs, Christmas decorations we'd chosen together when we still believed in forever. It all felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when Autumn finally came home at 7:30 the next morning. She looked terrible. Her makeup smeared, her dress wrinkled, her hair disheveled. She had clearly spent the night somewhere else, probably with Marcus. "We need to talk," she said, slumping into the chair across from me. "Yes, we do." For a long moment we just looked at each other. Without the anger and adrenaline of the previous night, I could see how exhausted she was, how unhappy. Despite everything she'd done, I felt a pang of sympathy for the woman I'd once loved so completely. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "Not just about last night, but about all of it. About the lying, the cheating, the way I've been treating you." "Thank you for saying that." "I lost myself somewhere along the way, Gerald. I don't know when it happened or how to fix it, but I know I've been cruel to you. You didn't deserve that." I nodded, accepting her apology without absolving her. What happens now? I don't know, she admitted. Victoria fired me yesterday. Well, she gave me the option to resign, but it amounts to the same thing. Marcus. Marcus doesn't want to see me anymore. He says the situation is too complicated, and he can't risk his own career. I felt a flicker of dark satisfaction at that news, followed immediately by guilt for feeling it. So he was willing to be with you when he thought I was just some absent husband, but now that he knows the truth, he's not interested anymore? Don't, she said wearily. Please don't make this worse than it already is. I'm not trying to make it worse, Autumn. I'm trying to understand how we got here. She rubbed her temples, looking older than her 53 years. I don't know. I really don't know. Somewhere along the way I started feeling invisible in my own life. Like I was just going through the motions of being a wife, being an employee, being a person. Marcus made me feel seen again. But I was right here, I said quietly. I was right here the whole time, trying to connect with you, trying to be part of your life. When did you stop seeing me? Tears started flowing down her cheeks. I don't know. God help me, Gerald. I don't know when I became such a selfish, horrible person. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our failed marriage settling between us like dust. Outside, the neighbors were starting their Saturday morning routines, mowing lawns, washing cars, living their normal lives while ours fell apart. I think, I said carefully, that we both deserve better than what we've become. She nodded, wiping her nose with a tissue. I know you probably hate me right now. I don't hate you, I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. I'm angry and I'm hurt, but I don't hate you. I think we just grew into different people who don't fit together anymore. So, what do? We get divorced? I said simply. We divide our assets, we sell the house, and we try to rebuild our lives separately. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Just like that? Not just like that. It'll be complicated and painful and probably take months to sort out. But yes, essentially just like that. What about counseling? What about trying to work things out? I shook my head. Autumn, last night you looked happier with Marcus than I've seen you in years, and I felt more alive talking to Victoria than I've felt in our entire marriage. We're not broken in a way that can be fixed. We're just wrong for each other. She cried then, really cried, and part of me wanted to comfort her. But a larger part of me recognized that her tears were for the security she was losing, not for the love we'd never really had. Will you be okay? She asked eventually. I think so. Will you? I don't know. I don't have a job. I don't have Marcus, and I'm about to not have you. I feel like I've destroyed everything good in my life. You made choices, I said gently. Bad choices, but choices nonetheless. Now you get to make new ones. 3 hours later, we had agreed on the basics. She would stay in the house until we could sell it. I would move into a furnished apartment downtown. We would use the same lawyer to keep things simple and civilized. We would tell our friends and family that we had grown apart and decided to separate amicably. As I packed a suitcase with enough clothes for a few days, Autumn watched from the doorway of our bedroom. Gerald, she said, as I zipped up the bag. For what it's worth, I really am sorry, and I hope you'll be happy with Victoria. Thank you, I said. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for too. As I carried my suitcase out to the car, I felt like I was walking out of a play I'd been performing in for 3 decades. The script hadn't been working for either of us, but we'd kept reading our lines anyway, hoping somehow the story would change. Now finally I was ready to write a new one. My phone buzzed as I drove away from the house. A text from Victoria. Coffee this afternoon. I have some ideas about what happens next. I smiled, feeling genuinely excited about the future for the first time in years. Whatever came next, it would be honest, it would be real, and it would be mine. 18 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the house Victoria and I had just bought together, watching her attempt to make pancakes while arguing with a client on her Bluetooth headset. She was wearing one of my old Oxford shirts over yoga pants, her silver hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she had flour on her nose. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. No, David, she was saying patiently into the headset while flipping what appeared to be a pancake-shaped disaster. We discussed this last week. The timeline hasn't changed just because your board is getting nervous. I walked over and gently took the spatula from her hand, kissing the flower off her nose. She grinned at me and mouthed, "Help," while continuing her conversation. "Yes, I understand the pressure you are under," she continued, "but rushing the implementation will only create bigger problems down the road." As I rescued the pancakes and started fresh ones, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. The divorce from Autumn had been finalized 8 months ago, proceeding exactly as we'd planned. Civilized, equitable, and relatively quick. She had moved to Phoenix to be closer to her sister and had taken a job with a smaller consulting firm. According to mutual friends, she seemed to be doing well, though she was still single. Victoria had rebuilt her senior staff after Autumn's departure, creating what she called a culture of integrity at Meridian Consulting. The company was thriving, having won 3 major new clients in the past year. Marcus Thompson, it turned out, had been quietly sharing confidential information with his firm for months, and both companies had severed ties with him permanently. But the professional vindication, satisfying as it was, paled in comparison to the personal happiness I'd found. Victoria ended her call and wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, pressing her face against my shoulder. "Thank you for saving breakfast," she murmured. "And for saving me." "I think we saved each other," I said, turning in her arms to face her. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "Only every day for the past year." "Good. I'd hate for you to forget." We had said those words to each other for the first time 6 months after my divorce was final. We'd been taking things slowly, both of us gun-shy about relationships and conscious of how our connection had begun, but by then it was clear that what we felt for each other wasn't just rebound romance or convenient timing. It was the real thing, deep, honest, and built on a foundation of genuine friendship and mutual respect. The doorbell rang, interrupting our moment. Victoria glanced at the clock on the microwave. "That'll be Sarah and Tom," she said. "Ready for our first dinner party as official homeowners." Sarah Chen was Victoria's business partner and one of her closest friends. Tom was her husband of 25 years and a retired professor who shared my love of classic literature. They had become our closest couple friends, and their marriage was the kind I'd always imagined I wanted. 2 people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and supported each other's dreams. The evening was perfect. Sarah brought her famous homemade bread. Tom regaled us with stories from his university days, and Victoria glowed with the kind of happiness that comes from being truly content with your life. As we sat around our dining room table sharing wine and laughter, I marveled at how different this felt from the forced social gatherings Autumn and I used to host. "So," Sarah said as we cleared the dinner plates, "have you two given any thought to making this official?" Victoria and I exchanged glances. We had in fact been discussing marriage for several weeks, but we hadn't made any announcements yet. "We're talking about it," Victoria said diplomatically. "Talking about it how?" Tom pressed, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Talking about whether to do it or talking about when and where?" "The latter," I admitted, and felt Victoria's hand find mine under the table. The truth was we both wanted to get married, but we were being careful not to rush into anything. Victoria had been married for 22 years before her husband's death, and she wanted to be certain this wasn't just a reaction to loneliness. I wanted to be sure I was choosing her for the right reasons, not just because she was everything Autumn hadn't been. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that our feelings were genuine and lasting. We complemented each other perfectly. Her decisive leadership balanced my thoughtful analysis. My steady calm soothed her occasional anxiety. We shared the same values, enjoyed the same activities, and most importantly, we brought out the best in each other. "Well," Sarah said, raising her wine glass, "whenever you decide to make it official, you have our blessing. I've never seen either of you this happy." After our friends left, Victoria and I sat on the back patio, enjoying the warm evening air and the comfortable silence that comes with deep contentment. "Gerald," she said finally, "I have something I want to ask you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, placing it on the table between us. I stared at it, then at her, my heart beginning to race. "I know this is unconventional," she said, her voice slightly shaky with nerves. I know the man is supposed to propose to the woman. But I'm 52 years old, I'm the CEO of my own company, and I've never been one to wait for things to happen to me. She opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold band. "Gerald Morrison," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved my life. Not dramatically, not heroically, but completely. You showed me what it feels like to be cherished for exactly who I am. You made me believe in partnership again. Will you marry me?" I looked at this extraordinary woman who had seen value in me when I'd forgotten my own worth, who had stood by me through the messy dissolution of my marriage, who made me laugh every single day and challenged me to be better than I thought I could be. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, absolutely yes." She slipped the ring onto my finger with trembling hands, and I pulled her close, kissing her with all the gratitude and love and hope I felt for our future together. 6 months later, we were married in a small ceremony in Victoria's backyard, surrounded by 30 of our closest friends and family. Sarah was Victoria's maid of honor, Tom was my best man, and even my accountant, Steve, who had been trying to get me to leave Autumn for years, cried during the vows. Autumn sent a gracious card wishing us well. She had met someone new, a teacher in Phoenix, who appreciated her energy and ambition. We were genuinely happy for each other. As I stood there promising to love, honor, and cherish Victoria for the rest of our lives, I thought about the journey that had brought us together. The pain of feeling invisible in my own marriage, the shock of discovering Autumn's betrayal, the courage it took to walk away from something familiar but toxic. But mostly I thought about how grateful I was for second chances, for the possibility of reinvention at any age, and for the incredible woman who had shown me that love didn't have to be a compromise. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife and I kissed my new bride under the string lights in our backyard, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. That night, as we lay in bed as newlyweds, Victoria traced patterns on my chest with her finger. "Any regrets?" she asked sleepily. "Only one," I said. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize I deserved better." She lifted her head to look at me, her eyes serious. "Promise me something, Gerald." "Anything. Promise me you will never forget your worth again. Promise me you will never settle for being invisible." "I promise," I said, meaning it completely. "And I promise you the same thing." As I drifted off to sleep beside the woman who had saved me from a life of quiet desperation, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or dramatic. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, loving freely, and refusing to settle for anything less than you deserve. At 57 years old, I had finally learned that lesson, and I intended to spend the rest of my life practicing it.